to our next conversation as we continue with our Congress on day one. The compliance officer has a leading role in organizations. And essentially, I think what we're trying to get to here is how to persuade, motivate, there's that term again, whether it's a soft motivation or hard motivation, and also create role models for people to achieve optimal compliance outcomes. It would be my understanding that the better motivated you are, the better understanding you are, and as Sean Wade was saying in our previous discussion, the greater understanding you have not only of the internal organizational dynamics, but also the needs of the customer and that critical interface, the more successful you are going to be. So our moderator is Tadeo Leandro Fernandez, Private Sector Compliance Specialist, Inter-American Development Bank. He and an august and enviable curriculum vitae. As I say, private sector compliance specialist at Inter-American Development Bank, LLM, lawyer with a specialization degree in tax law. Also a certified anti-money laundering and global sanctions specialist. So Tadeo, a very warm welcome to you from Jeremy Maggs here in South Africa. This is an important panel discussion and I look forward to the conversation that you're going to lead.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here, and hopefully this is going to be a great panel. So, let's go to the point. First and foremost, I would like to thank the members of the organization. I think I'm speaking both on regard of NECA and Jason. Because of this, I think it's going to be an excellent compliance congress, as well as the last year. And I would like to thank the organization, the International Federation of Compliance Association, and in particular to my friends in the Argentine Ethics. As you may see, in this panel, we will talk about the compliance officer as a leading role in organizations, how to persuade, how to motivate, and to be a role model to achieve optimal compliance outcomes. And I have the pleasure of being the moderator of this panel with two great compliance officers, NECA Gloria Nuaca and Jason Palmer. NECA is a senior regional compliance officer for MoneyGram International, currently managing compliance advisory for Africa. Hopefully, NECA, I mentioned your name very well. I've been practicing, but you know. She has 15 years of experience within banking and payment services. And prior to working with MoneyGram, NECA worked with major banks in Nigeria, leading compliance team. NECA is a lawyer. She's a certified anti-money laundering specialist, a certified product examiner, and a fellow of the Compliance Institute of Nigeria. Jason is a senior compliance officer within Hewlett-Packard International Bank. He's an experienced compliance professional with over 32 years experience in the financial industry sector. Previously, he held AML and compliance roles in Rabobank and in international life assurance companies of AXA and HSBC. Jason is an active member of the Association of Compliance Officers in Ireland. Finally, my name is Tadeo Fernandez. I'm an Argentine lawyer, currently working as a private sector compliance specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank. So, at the title of the panel said, we will talk about leading, motivating, and persuading in the compliance field. That's, I imagine many of you that are here know that this is not an easy task to do, and that's nothing that you should be done in one case. It's something that should be a necessary skill for compliance officer on the long run. So compliance officer face challenge trying to do that, many challenge. And hopefully this panel would shed some light from the experience of NECA and Jason. Preliminarily, and here it's where I'm going to stop to giving the floor to Jason, I would like to introduce some starting point. And here I'm taking some ideas from Joseph Murphy, in which are, I think, some of the interesting selling points making the business case of compliance. Why compliance programs should be why we should advocate for good compliance program and why they should be part of any organization. I think one of the first one is protecting, and something that was referred in the previous panel, is protect the company and protect the reputation and the brand of the company. That's something that I think is critical. In addition to reducing or sometimes avoiding legal consequence, reducing criminal sentences and civil liabilities. Other thing that it was mentioned in the previous panel, and I'm very happy that we are going to reinforce that, is having a good compliance program is the right thing to do. And it's also a global trend. This is not anymore something unique or particular for very big enterprises. This is something that any company should have because all companies face risk. And finally, this is not optional anymore in a lot of jurisdictions, in a lot of industries, in many cases. So what I think we are going to hear now from Jason are specific points about how, Jason, how do you see the role of the compliance officer? How a compliance officer can be a leader and motivate within the organization? And please, now I leave the floor to you.
Many thanks. I've got a small presentation that I'll go through, but first of all, I want to say what a deep honor it is today to be here with you and to be part of this panel. This is a subject that I hold very, very dear, and it is at the heart of everything. And actually, the last question to the previous panel sets us up nicely to go through what is our role, how we are that leader in the compliance. So if my slide deck could come up, if it hasn't already done so. Thank you very much. So first off, really, you've got to think to yourself, where does it all start? And before you can start seeing why we are the leader, I just want to just go through one or two quick things. Just that, what is our culture? The culture we need to be going for is making sure that we have people in the organization who do the right thing when no one else is looking. So then moving then to our role as the compliance officer. I always say, you don't have to be a superhero to be a compliance officer. It just helps. And for that, it's because compliance officers were there to help stop things going wrong from the regulatory perspective. But more importantly, we're there to help to deal with things when they do go wrong. And that is the basis of our leadership role within the organization. Traditionally, everything would have been seen very much of one approach, the legal approach or the X approach or the audit approach, when actually it's a blended approach required. And to that extent, I believe there are three pillars to being a leader in compliance. There's the traditional police officer, but then there's the counselor. And then lastly, but perhaps more importantly, the relationship manager. And this blended approach is the way that those persons deemed to be the compliance officers within the organization can actually help to lead and be that force of good within the organization. Ultimately, it's about building trust and credibility, because without trust and credibility, then you are nothing. So what I want to do is perhaps take a look at each of those particular areas and then consider some of the aspects of why I believe it is fundamental for being part of a leadership role as a compliance officer. Taking the police officer. Well, here we're looking to establish the regulatory requirements and the impact they're going to have on our business. Knowledge, like all things, is key. Once we've done that, then it's a case of working with the organization to start. My slide doesn't seem to be moving on from the thing here. How many bullet points can we see, my colleagues? Okay, I'll keep on going, but the slide seems to have through. So then once we have those rules, we then establish our policies, our procedures to help ensure that we have practices to keep on working through that. Once we have those practices, it's then about developing that compliance program to monitor against them, to make sure that the activities we see are in line with the activities that are expected. Then, of course, there's the reporting to senior management, taking corrective actions, and then tracking and managing issues as and when they develop. So that is our police officer. But the police officer helps to inform the counsellor. And the counsellor is then taking it that next stage. Because to be a leader in the organisation, it's a case of leading by example. And my slide deck is moved on, but unfortunately, it is not moving on from the particular screen from that. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to stop sharing, and I will restart sharing and see if that actually solves the problem, because we seem to have one or two technical hiccups coming up at the moment. Just bear with me. Okay, hopefully we will now see my screen again. So, moving then on to the counsellor. The counsellor's role is very much to adopt the culture within the organisation and to be the voice of the consumer or the customer, to be able to promote advice and guidance. Advice and guidance to senior managers for those very big strategic decisions, but likewise advice and guidance to staff members when dealing with day-to-day queries from customers. Once again, remembering that mantle at the start, doing the right thing when no one else is looking. And then obviously get involved with the product and market approval process within the organization. And a key element in all of this is training and education within the business units. This then leads to relationship manager. The relationship manager, this is where we're now monitoring external stakeholder expectations. The stakeholders could be regulators, competitors, customers, the organizations which we sort of think group organizations. It's then working with the internal stakeholders to identify pragmatic solutions. When I first moved into compliance many years ago, it was seen as being the business prevention unit or the people that always say no. When now, with the relationship manager approach and the counsellor, we are now part of that solution. We are finding pragmatic solutions, and we're even better than the sales guys. And it's that interface to make sure that we are keeping all the plates spinning at the same time, working with our regulators, being proactive, and very much making sure that we're making informed decisions. And of course, supporting corporate programs, initiatives as and when they arrive from that side. Oops. And of course, working with the business to take preventative measures. So that sort of sums up my my sort of thoughts on the slide deck. But you know, I think I'll just sort of finish it by just sort of covering off and saying it is all about, as I said before, leading by the example and having the adaptive approach, and knowing when you need to change that approach to ensure that you continue to build trust and become a useful asset to the organization. So that's how I conclude, and I will pass the mantle back.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you. I really liked the presentation. I really can find some value, not some, a lot of value in the description of this three role of the compliance officer. And for sure, I would really use it for my own purposes because I think it's really comprehensive. And I think NECA, taking from Jason's points, What do you think are the factors to achieve best compliance outcomes? Which tools can or should be used to motivate within the organization? Sorry, Neka, I think you're in mute, maybe, or my computer.
Apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now perfectly. Thank you, Neka.
Okay. So thank you again, Tadio, and thank you, Jason, for that presentation. As a matter of fact, I feel that the presentation in a nutshell embodies what we are discussing today relating to the role of a compliance officer and how they motivate and persuade within their organization. Especially with, I think it's the slide 5. I don't know, Jason, if you'll be able to put it up. If not, it's the slide where you have the 3 different categories of the way a compliance officer works. And one thing that we notice is that most people do not necessarily find it difficult to see the compliance officer in his police officer role. Most people are comfortable with that. Most people, that is what they see and know about the compliance officer, yes. And even some compliance officers themselves do not understand that their role is way more than this enforcement and police officer role. We can see that much as compliance itself is evolving, we can see that the role of a compliance officer is also evolving. He's a counselor, he's a relationship manager. It's involving so many other things, right? And looking at how a compliance officer can persuade and motivate within his organization, for me, I think that the compliance officer himself is very key to this. What do I mean? There's a saying that says that he who seeks equity must do equity. So if a compliance officer wants to have an organization where ethics and professionalism is key, then he himself must first demonstrate those attributes as a compliance officer. It's said that you cannot give what you don't have. So if you're not able to demonstrate those standards of ethics, those standards of professionalization that is required, it will be very difficult to get your staff members to do the same. They are not going to do these things because you say so in your training programs. They are not going to do it because your policies and your procedures say they have to. They are going to do these things because they see that you, as the head of compliance, is modeling these attributes. We say that relating to a compliance officer, 2 of the most important attributes that he needs to have is ethics and professionalism. He can never be seen to be sitting on the fence when it comes to these kinds of issues. Another thing that he can do to motivate his staff is to empower his staff. What do I mean? When you say, usually we say that compliance is everybody's business. This is not just a slogan that we chant during compliance trainings or something that we say because we need something that is catchy or anything like that. It's actually something that is supposed to be integrated into the nitty-gritty of the way a compliance program is run. You need your staff to understand that when they do compliance, they're not helping the compliance department in head office. They're not trying to get compliance to leave them alone, and that's why they are doing these things. They need to understand and see that this is their responsibility. The frontline staff, for example, need to understand that they are the risk owners when it comes to some of these compliance issues. An example will be an organization where you have to say, render suspicious transactions. A lot of times, especially if it's a customer-facing organization, some of the key red flag activities happen between the frontline staff and the customer. The compliance officer may not even be aware of these occurrences. And so if your frontline staff do not understand that I am a compliance officer as well, I have a responsibility to pick up on compliance issues and address them accordingly. I'm not just sitting back and waiting for head office compliance to do something, then you're going to have a problem, right? So the frontline staff, everybody in the organization needs to understand that I own the risk on my desk and I see it as part of doing my job. When they have that awareness, when they have that empowerment, you'll be surprised at how effective the compliance program will be in the organization. Another thing I feel that you need to do is that we need to weave the compliance culture into the very fabric of your organization. A lot of times when you see organizations that are being set up, they are quick to get business development managers, they are quick to get product managers, they are quick to get people from finance or treasury, as the case might be. Most times you see them come into compliance when the business is already set up and they are ready to roll out. At that time, a compliance officer is probably coming and there are so many risk issues that he now has to start addressing. But the way it's supposed to be is that at the onset, compliance is supposed to be an integral part of the organization, so that when you're putting your processes, when you're putting your structures, when you're building the foundation of your organization, compliance is also woven into all of those things. It's a culture that is inbuilt from the word go, so that the organization has all it needs to comply effectively. Another thing that I also feel can help to motivate your staff is to educate your staff. Right? I know the Jason also mentioned something like this. The previous speaker, I think, also mentioned something like this, that you need to educate your staff. This is one of the strongest tools that you can use to set up your staff for success. If you do not let your people know what is expected from them, and when I say education, I don't mean just training. There are so many other things. You have to test their understanding. You have to do several you have to test your key risk issues to be sure that they know what they are supposed to do even before these risks crystallize. If you do not do that, you're just setting up your people for failure. No matter how beautiful your policies are, no matter how beautiful your processes are, you need to understand that processes and systems do not run themselves. People run processes, people run systems. And if the people that are to run those processes and systems do not have the relevant knowledge, the relevant know-how, then it will be impossible, at the very least, very difficult for them to fulfill their role. And then something else that I also feel that you need to do if you want to persuade and motivate your people in an organization is that you have to have clear and documented processes and procedures. You do not let your staff figure out how to do things as they go along. You have to be clear. This is what is expected of you. This is how you're supposed to do it. If you identify these kinds of red flag activity, for example, this is the process of escalation. This is who you escalate it to. These are the kinds of questions that you ask. This is where you stop asking questions so that you do not tip off the person that is doing the transaction. If all of that is not clearly stipulated, then you're going to be in for issues. Now, one of the things that I also say is that putting your processes and your policies in place is not a test of how well you can draft documents, so to speak. We're not looking to see how well you can be technical or how much knowledge you have in compliance. You need to put in a policy that everybody within your organization, from the chairman of your board down to the least person in the organization, should be able to pick up that document, read it, understand what is expected of him or her, and implement same accordingly. So that is one. And then, of course, I think it's Jose in the previous session also mentioned this, that as a compliance officer, if you want to talk about motivating your organization, you have to understand the business. If you do not understand the business, you're not going to be able to handle the risk. You're not going to be able to do what you're supposed to do. It's going to be a case of figuratively, the blind leading the blind, and it's not going to end up anywhere good. You have to understand the business. If you do not understand the business, you cannot effectively manage the risk that comes with the business. So as a compliance officer, before you can say that you want to be putting processes and systems in place to manage the risk, then you need to understand what the business is about. You need to understand what they are saying. So even when products are coming out and when businesses are coming up, you need to be able to then know that, okay, this can work, this will not work. If you want to go this route, these are the risk mitigants that you need to put in place. All of that comes from your understanding of the business. Now, talking about tools, you asked me about the tools that can be used to motivate. One of the things I can say is that we know that in some organizations, you have instances where compliance officers never get promoted or hardly ever get promoted, because one thing about compliance program is that when it is running smoothly, sometimes people can begin to question the need for a compliance officer. So if every time the regulators come for an examination, for example, and they never notice any compliance issues, every time they come is a no finding, every time they come is a no finding, you run the risk, the management, if they're not careful, may run the risk of thinking that, well, then we don't really need a compliance officer. They need to understand that the reason why the regulators are finding no risk is because the compliance officer is doing his job. The reason why there are no compliance failings usually would be because the compliance officer is doing his job. So you need to make sure that compliance officers are not penalized for carrying out their compliance responsibilities. They need to, if they meet the standards for promotion, for example, they need to be promoted. If they meet the standards for bonus payments, they need to be paid as well. So they need to be rewarded as needed. And sometimes some of the tools that you can use do not necessarily have to be something exorbitant. So you can do something like sending out an email for a job well done to a staff can motivate some people, right? And then you can also, in some instances, name and shame, where people, where there are compliance failings, you can also send out an email to all staff, letting them know what has happened, what the failing was. And you see that people begin to sit up because they don't want to be named and shamed. Also, you can also have an instance where compliance is a component of the appraisal system, so that compliance officers don't feel that they are doing the job and there's nothing that they are getting from it, but that the whole aspect of the compliance risk management also forms part of the organization's appraisal system. I think some of these are ways that you can motivate and role model compliance in your organization. Thank you, Tadeo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nneka. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well? I had been having some issues. Everything's fine? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if there are
The salespeople. And predominantly what would always happen is they would always get phone calls from us or emails from us saying, you've done this wrong, you did this wrong. And I took a different approach, that actually when I found that I saw really good practice, I sent a note to say, well done. That's really good the way you've evidenced that. Can you share that with your colleagues? Because we've been getting some issues here. And that led me then to go out to then meet the sales teams directly in doing that. And, you know, it's about catching people doing the right things and celebrating that success. They always say you can catch more things with honey than you do vinegar. And it's the same sort of principle from that. It's just a little anecdote I just wanted to throw in there.
Oh, thank you, Jason. I think that's a great point. And I like your first part of the presentation that you mentioned that compliance was the know people where to go when you want to know for an answer. But I don't think that it's the case anymore, at least in most situations. And going back to, I think, a question that I think it's going to be relevant for many of the people in the audience and from ourselves as well, is how to be a role model remotely. And what are going to be the challenge of a compliance officer in the new normal working from home? How do you think, both Jason and Nneka, think is going to be a measure to check the effectiveness of compliance officer working from home, where management would be working from home, board would be working from home, and employees would be working from home? How do you think is going to impact the leading role of the compliance officer? Maybe Nneka first. Given the floor.
All right. In my view, I don't think you should have that much of an impact, whether you're in the office, whether you're working from home. Remember, your role as a compliance officer is not to micromanage your people in implementing the processes and the systems. You should have a system documented. You should have your policies, your guidelines documented. You should have the right people. You should have them trained to do what they are supposed to do, whether you're there or not. Remember from Jason, when he made his presentation, he said compliance is doing the right thing when nobody is looking. So someone who would not comply when he's outside the office will also not comply in the office. Remember, for most organizations, compliance is a head office function. You sit in head office and you have your people working from different places. So even though they are working from the office, they are not exactly working in the office of the compliance officer. So if they are not able to function independent of the compliance officer, there's a problem with the program, there's a problem with the staff involved. So for me, I think that the program should be able to run whether your staff is working remotely or in the office. But then again, that's my opinion.
Which I wholeheartedly agree with. So our organization, you know, I work for Hewlett Packard, And we're in 50 different countries. And although I'm in the EMEA region, I deal with colleagues all over the world. And, you know, the responsibility for compliance is the business itself. And so one of the things that we've been trying to build is making sure that it's your friendly neighborhood compliance officer. I come back to our superhero. It just helps if you're a superhero. But it's being approachable. It's being adaptable. It's being a case, if there's a problem, people can come and talk to you and know that you're not, to use an Irish phrase, going to give out to them. You're there helping to provide solutions and solve problems. And so as soon as we went remotely, I always keep my camera on whenever I'm on conference calls. People can see me, they can see my expressions, they can see me smile. And smiling can help. It's some of the small things about doing that. But it means by being adaptable and approachable, when people then are second guessing something, they know that they can come and pick up the phone. I have a little phrase I give to our staff members. If in doubt, give us a shout. And I'd rather have 10 phone calls from our colleagues about a subject that I can help then, and if it needs training or anything else, we can deal with it then, than for someone to feel they can't do it. The other aspect we do is we try and join some of the team calls. And so then, then once again, you're making yourself approachable and always catching people doing things right and celebrating their successes, because it's just so important then when you're doing that, you can make sure then it can help to really build that trust. And it's all about trust and building those strong relationships, irrespective of you're in the office or out of the office.
Thank you,
Hope
Jason.
that answers the question.
Yes, and you give me some point for the next question, and I will keep it with you, Jason. And how can we, as compliance officer, measure this compliance behavior, or better, that the compliance officer is having a leading role within the organization? How do you think there are the specific key performance indicators, or which other kind of tools should we use to measure the effectiveness of the persuading motivator role of the compliance officer?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And for me, I started my time in customer service. And I suppose I never really left, even as a compliance officer. So for me, the feedback we get from our customers is always a key one for me of how effective we are as an organization, because it isn't just the compliance officer. It is the whole business as compliance. And if your complaint ratios and your error ratios are down, I would see that as being a really good sort of yardstick. If also we're finding that complaints from sales, internal complaints regarding things are down, it means that you're being effective there in the fact of you're able to work with the sales colleagues to find pragmatic solutions to enable them to get on and work their business from that side. The other aspect is making sure that as the compliance officer, you're in all the right decision-making forums and bodies. Because to the point was made earlier that sometimes, in the past, you've seen the scenario where the compliance officer has been brought in far too late. But if we're in those bodies that are considering and discussing compliance needs, it is so much easier to encourage, nudge, and get them to change direction than having to say, stop everything. It comes back to that superhero thing. I remember as a youngster, showing my age, there was a program on TV called Dick Tracy. And Dick Tracy had this magic watch that could stop everything. And it'd be Dick Tracy, and the whole world would stop. And Dick Tracy could then solve the problem. We don't have that in our world. So we need to make sure the compliance officer is there at all times and is then able then to work it through. I think the last point I'd add is the compliance officer should also be reporting directly to the board or an audit committee and get the feedback there. And more importantly, to make sure their voice is heard, there, because sometimes if you're going up to that management train, the message may get sort of adjusted. But if you're speaking directly to the board, I think that is a key one from that side.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I
Thank
could
you.
weigh in on what he said, I think also in addition to some of the things that he said, another way that you can measure the effectiveness of a compliance officer would be how proactive the compliance program is, right, in the first instance. And of course, because we know that no matter how good your program is, there are going to be instances where some of your risks may crystallize. So when you have those risk issues, how reactive the program is. Your compliance program cannot be static. It cannot be such that you are not able to adapt to either risk issues or even innovations, right? So how fast you can react to changes can also be an indication as to the effectiveness of your compliance program.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nika. Thank you, Nika. And going within that line of thought, and trying to lead, to motivate, and to persuade, using incentives or punishments, positive or negative reinforcement. What do you think it's better from a leadership standpoint or for a compliance program within an organization? Should be better taking incentives for compliance for people within the organization that is working towards compliance, or should we punish those that are not being compliant? What do you think is better in terms of an effective compliance program?
Should I start? Okay.
Please.
In my view, it's always a combination of both, right? I would love to only use positive reinforcements, right? That's the ideal situation where we always have to just encourage and motivate people to do the right thing. But you and I know that that is not going to work in all circumstances. There are always going to be instances where you have to make a judgment call as to whether you need to do more to motivate someone to do what they're supposed to do. So my answer would be both. Of course, positive reinforcement goes first. And where you find out that it's not working, then you have to bring in the stick. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation.
If I could perhaps jump in there, I think you're right. As I said, it's the blended adaptive approach. And it is about the positives first. But the other issue would be that if there's wrongdoing and everyone knows there's wrongdoing and that person's never held to account, then everyone else starts thinking, well, why should I be the person doing the good when no one else is looking if they're not and they're being rewarded? So it's all about seeing fair play in all aspects. Everyone needs to be given a second chance. We're all human. We all make mistakes. But it's how we learn from those mistakes and how we look to put things right is the key matter here. And so that's the thing I've just had to sort of end that piece on, is just to say it's about being adaptive and knowing which one to use for the current situation, because depending on the situation, either or could be the best one.
Thank you, Jason. I don't know if there are questions from the audience. If not, I will use, I think, because of the timing, maybe a last one related to this. What we have been talking is, are there other alternatives in terms of incentive punishments? Can we consider using compliance ambassadors within the teams or the different departments, like to outsource the leading role of the compliance officer? What do you think, Nika?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Can you? Tadio, could you repeat your question, please?
Sorry, yes. In terms of punishment and incentives, do you think that there are other alternatives? Like, for instance, having a compliance ambassador kind of type of employees within different units and part of the organization So a compliance officer can be, let's say, outsourced within different parts of the organizations and not be just the one leading role or the compliance officer just the only one, and have it different ambassadors to check and to reinforce the different roles and motivating people within the units. Do you think that's something that is useful, or there are some challenges in doing that?
I say yes to both. It's useful to have compliance champions in the different sections. However, the risk that may come from that is where people begin to think that those champions are responsible for compliance risk management. Everybody still needs to understand that compliance is everybody's business. Yes, of course, just like you have the compliance officer, the head of compliance in maybe head office driving the entire compliance program for the organization, it helps if there's someone within the smaller structures also driving within that space. But the understanding should be clear. This person is merely driving and is not totally and wholly responsible for compliance risk management in that small space.
I would actually totally agree with everything that's said there. You know, the compliance ambassadors are key in helping the business understand its own, or the interpretation of compliance. But it shouldn't be seen as a replacement for compliance. Just like I would always expect to see in the first line, proper quality assurance being undertaken to ensure that in the first instance, the business itself is supervising itself and making sure that people are doing the right things from that side. I think the key takeaway really for me is the compliance function needs to be adaptive and to understand and monitor situations to identify those early warning signs to say you need to change your approach or you need to do something different. And all the way you're trying to build up your credibility and identifying those pragmatic solutions to ensure we're protecting our customers, protecting our company and protecting our boards and protecting our employees, and not forgetting to protect ourselves as well.
Yes, that's a key point that you mentioned at the end, Jason. We have a couple of questions more like that we have prepared. I don't know if we should go. I think we have just 2 minutes, and I think it's too little for answering a good or complex question. I don't know if we should keep or.
Tadeo, I think with a minute to go before your session ends, we are going to leave it there. But thank you very much indeed for an insightful discussion and certainly explaining to our audience. We have just over 440 delegates from right around the world, explaining to them just what the new age compliance officer is. So I am going to thank you very much indeed.